Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
Welcome to Dominate Your Day. Today I have a special guest. Her name is Julie Holunga. She is a leadership trainer, a TEDx speaker. She's a coach and author, and she helps female professionals lead with influence and authority. And I can't be more excited to have you here on the show today, Julie. So welcome.
Thank you, Dana. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, and I found out that you know your strengths, which not all of my guests know their unique talents, but I love it when they go, oh, here's my top 5. So, Julie, tell us your top 5 Clifton strengths.
Sure. So we were laughing about this, that this does not surprise you at all when I shared. The top 5 are communication, harmony, individualization, relator, and woo.
So I told Julie when she was telling me her top 5 and she got to the woo, I said, there it is. Because I was watching your TEDx talk. I was watching the photos that you had on your speakers page. I was like, man, she's just so happy when she's around people. And we know that with woo, right? And then of course you've got communications, which is a great storyteller. So I can't wait to hear your stories today, because I kind of got a little bit of it in your bio, but I'm always curious about how people got to where they are today. And so, Julie, you were at Harvard, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
what brought you to Harvard right out of college? I mean, what were you doing there?
Well, I decided to move to Boston first and foremost. And you're working in Boston, there are a lot of universities to apply to. And at the time, I thought I would like to be a dean of students one day. And when I had been in undergrad, part of my volunteer work, I had volunteered with the dean of students, who I just adored. So thought, oh, this would be really cool, live on a college campus. And so decided, if I'm going to be in Boston, I might as well work at the best of the best, and started working at Harvard, and got to meet some really cool people like Madeleine Albright and Al Gore, and trying to think of else, some just really impressive people, big names and not big names, and our donors, and worked with an unbelievable team of people who I'm still in touch with, and who really taught me what excellence looks like. And I know that I have some colleagues now who get annoyed because I nitpick everything, because there can be no mistakes, because that's what I was brought up in, right? That we triple checked everything. Yeah. And so I'm very proud of that. I like that aspect of what I did. And so I started working at the university in fundraising in the development office, and worked at a startup, and then came back and worked at Harvard Business School on an initiative examining women in the workforce, and basically the infrastructures that weren't in place to retain and advance women into leadership roles.
So what year was this when you were kind of working on this project? Because it seems like it's about the same in some areas. It's gotten better.
Yes. Well, I'll never forget, because it was the start of 2006, because I was pregnant. I didn't know at the time, but I was pregnant with our daughter, who's now 17. And I didn't know that she was a girl, but when I took the job. But when she was born, it just reinforced this passion and mission of mine that she has when she enters the workforce, that she gets the same opportunities as her brother, and that women are seen and given opportunities regardless of, the conversations we've all had, whether they're going to have babies or not, or whether they have a traveling spouse or not. But really that they get the same opportunities, whether they choose to accept them or not. That's a different story. And that's the conversation I have a lot now, is really seizing those opportunities. But that's my hope, is that by the time I leave this planet, that my daughter will do take on whatever opportunity she wants, and And at 17, I will tell you that she does whatever she wants. So that's another conversation.
Isn't that great though?
But
And is she
yes,
one of the ones that plays hockey? I heard you have a house full of hockey
yes,
players.
yes. They all
Awesome.
do. They all do. Dana, I'm the only one who does not.
You're on the
But yes, she
sidelines cheering them
played.
on.
Yes. Yes, I'm very good on the sidelines. Yes, her college essay actually was about being the only girl on an all boys hockey team for 10 years.
Good for her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's great for her and it's all the qualities I want in her, but it's hard to be on the receiving end as her mother. But it's all the good things. I keep reminding myself of that no one tells her what to do.
So when you were a child, this is we're gonna go back. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think relates to what you're doing right now when you were a child? Was there a favorite experience or favorite something that happened way back when that kind of
Yeah.
helped relate to what you're doing, this work you're doing right now to help women be strong, be themselves and be strong influencers in the workplace? How did you
Yes.
get there?
So when I was 6 years old, just before I started first grade, my family, we moved to Paris and spent the next 7 years. We were living in New York at the time, and we moved to Paris. So I started first grade. I started elementary school in Paris, and then we were abroad for 7 years. So we were in Paris, New Delhi, and Hong Kong.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was yeah, constantly changing environment, constantly changing groups of friends, and always being in Hong Kong, and they call it guilo, which is the foreigner, right? So always sticking out in a crowd.
Mm.
The only time I stuck out less was in India. I had a very good friend who was very blonde, like beach bleach blonde hair,
Mhm.
and they would look at her more. They stared at her more than they stared at me.
You're like, "Oh,
Um,
good." Look at
yes,
her.
take the spotlight out of me,
Oh
away
my
from me.
goodness.
But that experience really, I've realized it now, obviously years later, that it really formed who I am as a person, and all of those strengths that we talked about, being the relator, being harmony. It really, that experience developed my curiosity in people
Mm.
and understanding what makes them tick. So this weekend we were watching some documentaries. I love sports documentaries, and we
Mm.
watched the one I highly recommend. If you haven't watched, the
Beckham?
listeners haven't watched the one on the Kelsey brothers, it's
No.
on Amazon Prime.
Kelsey
It's
Brothers.
so good. I loved it. My husband said I'm a little bit too obsessed with them now, but they're good people, so it's okay. But I love, during the Olympics or any like behind the scenes stories of how people got to where they are. Similar, I
Mhm.
guess, to the question you're asking
Yeah.
me. I'm really fascinated by it, and I have a lot of friends who make fun of me because I'll ask them a lot of questions about, like, what does your day look like? Because I can't. I have a friend who's an orthopedic surgeon. Like, what does that day look like? Like, do you prepare for every surgery? What does your team do? And then, I have a friend who works in foreign affairs, at the State Department. Like, what does your day look like?
Mm.
And I'm always asking them all of these questions, and they'll make fun of me. Like, why do you care? I'm like, well, I just want to
Curious.
know. I want to understand, like, how does this work? And why did you decide to go into this?
That
Like, we all have had these experiences, right?
Yeah, that's your
Um,
individualization. Did you know that?
yes.
'Cause that
Oh.
yes, 'cause that you're trying to figure out, "Okay, here's my friend that is this orthopedic surgeon, but here's this other friend in foreign
Yeah.
affairs," and you're customizing what you're doing for them. You're a customizer.
Mhm.
So, it's
Mhm.
or how you're connecting with them. Yes.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I'm gonna make note of that one. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I hear in that,
Yes.
and I think I have that too, and I think that's why I always wanna ask those questions. I'm like, "Okay, tell me, Julie, you were in New Delhi, you were in, Hong Kong, you went to Paris, and who knew that you would be in this get to Harvard in this study and then take it now out as a coach, executive coach to these women."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
did you know that all the time, or did it just evolve as you
It
grew into your career?
evolved. It evolved. And I'd say that I mean, I have one kid in college, one about to start college, and I tell them they're friends, and I tell the young emerging leaders that I work with, like, just be patient, right? Not all of us know. That orthopedic surgeon did not know at 16 or 17 that he wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. He didn't know in undergrad. That's what he wanted to do. And just let these pieces fall and it will all start to take shape. And that's what happened to me. And I see it in so many people that I work with. I saw it in my mom. I know that when we're patient, when we are just learning and being that sponge, that we can get to where we need to be. And now I love of where I am, obviously, but I'm really on a mission now to rid our world of lazy leaders, because I see it every day, like we were talking about, that we need more leaders who communicate clearly and directly. They don't sugarcoat. They see conflict as a necessity and not something that we just have to avoid and stay away from. And that they use strong leadership language, like they don't undermine themselves unnecessarily. And I see that so often, more so with women, but I do see it in men as well.
And do you work, I know you work a lot with women, but it sounds like you work with men as well.
I do. And it really depends, the time of year, but I always have, it's not always half and half, but usually around 60-40 women to men.
So tell us about a favorite experience you had in this role that you have right now, or could have been in the last, since you started your practice, what you've seen, kind of a transformation.
Yeah. So, oh, wow, that's a great question. There are a couple of things that come to mind, but one that happened most recently was I was working with a team. I've been a coach in the organization, working with their new leaders, like as they come into the C-suite, working with them there or one level below. And one of my leaders became the CIO. And she asked me to come in and lead the two teams that had to get along for the success of the business. They had to get along, share information, really engage in the conflict that was going on. And they liked each other just fine. They just they did not work well together. And she asked me to come in. They brought these teams from Europe, Canada, and the US, and we spent 2 full, very long days together, but really energizing days. And in the beginning, there was a little bit of training. How do you build trust? How do you communicate effectively? I put them through an assessment to help them understand their preferred way of communicating. And we went to dinner that night, a delicious dinner. And people were sharing all this information. And of course, it was all new to me because aside from the one woman, I'd never met any of them before. And I lost track. I started counting, but I lost track of how many times people said, "Oh, I didn't know that about you. Oh, I didn't know that about you." And some of them had worked together for 5 years, 10 years, and they didn't know, that one of them was talking about how he lives in Norway and loves to ski. And he was sitting next to a guy, they've worked together for, I think, 7 years. And he said, "I didn't know you skied. I love to ski."
Isn't that cool?
It was. And then, so the next day we did I facilitated some conversations about, what do we want to do when this happens? Like when these moments of conflict are happening, what do we want to do to have effective meetings? What do we want to do? Really, the umbrella was, how can we perform as a high performing team? Like these two teams have to get along. And as I was walking out, the two leaders of the teams were walking out with me. And one of them, who I'd met, the day before, he said to me, "Well, you just fixed our people." And it was the best compliment I to this day probably I've ever received. And it continues. So this was almost a year ago now. And they keep telling me how it has, like, the conflict happens. And they tell me, "We don't really want to deal with it, but you're on our head, so we deal with it." But it's not ugly. It's a little bit uncomfortable, right? But it's not toxic. It's not like, I'm not going into panic mode. That's what one of the leaders said to me. Like, "I'm not panicking anymore because I know I can do this, and I know that we're striving for the same thing." So that was really cool. Yeah. And it was, like I said, it was long days, but after that comment, like, you fixed our people, I got into the cab to go to the airport and I thought, oh my gosh, like that, I want to do that every week. That was just amazing
And that's your
to witness that.
yeah, but how
Yeah.
cool is this? When I heard this story, I heard several things, Julie. I heard your harmony because people with
Mhm.
harmony want to get consensus. And
Yes.
they have the middle ground. And so the conflict,
Mhm.
you probably don't like conflict either, but you've taught yourself how to manage conflict and why it can be good is what I'm hearing you say. Is that right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And so it like ticked off that energy of, wow, I got consensus.
Yes.
Right? And then I taught them
Yes.
skills to help them find ways to get consensus when they're in conflict. Is that right? Is
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And the self-awareness, right?
mm,
Like with the work that we do, they have to have that self-awareness of when I'm in this situation or when I'm with this person or under these circumstances, this is my natural response.
I
I
love it.
want to avoid conflict or I want to engage in a hard conversation. But then what to do with it, right? Because none of us were ever taught any of these skills that we need to have now as leaders. It was just sort of this expectation that you're really good technically in whatever it is that you do. So we'll give you more responsibility. We'll give you a bigger team. We'll give you a bigger project to manage, which complexity comes with that. And then, but I often see that we put people into situations that they can't handle. And it's no fault of their own, but we set them up to fail.
So when you were starting this work with Harvard, and then you went on your own, and then we went through COVID, and now we're in hybrid, and nobody's going back. Hybrid is here to
Right.
stay. What are you seeing are the trends right now that you're seeing with emerging leaders, or new executives that you feel like are some tips that you can share as we're in this
Sure.
new workplace?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've seen is that conflict has risen. I don't think that has changed in the sense of, um, people liked conflict before and didn't now. But what I'm seeing is with this screen between us, people are way more willing to lob out some comment
Mm,
in, Zoom or Teams chat or send a DM of, like something you would never say to someone's face.
mm,
And then they now have to go back into the office and they don't have that protection of a screen between them.
mm.
And relationships have suffered. Cultures have most definitely suffered. Either the culture has completely dissolved. Um, I'm also seeing, which this part makes me sad, is people aren't looking at leaders or at each other as human beings. And they're just assuming that everyone is perfect all the time. And that's just
Mm.
it just is not what happens. And people, I'm seeing and hearing stories from my clients that, their teams are saying things that's getting back to them, or they're saying disparaging things that gets back to the leader, or they're doing things and making fun or putting people down, and it gets back. Of course it gets back to
Mm.
people. And that they don't think it's a big deal. And I've seen far too strong of leaders who have an emotional reaction when they hear the stories that kind of what's happening. And it makes me really sad that people just assume that leaders have it all together all the time and not practicing a little bit of grace that, especially in the last few years, right? We've been thrown so many different situations. And they're like, I always think about, I'm in Denver and, it was March 13th and I was at a networking meeting and we were talking about COVID and what was going on. And we said, well, it'll be fine. And we planned a happy hour for the first week of April. I remember that and
Mm.
thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. And um, just what leaders were doing that day to shut down
Mhm.
and to set their people up for success, and so much that they were holding for everyone and trying to make good decisions with little to no information.
And that continued. And I
You're right.
saw the difference in the leaders. I was there at Southwest when this was going on. And I
Mm.
think having our strengths helped us move
Mm-hmm.
quicker because we could put everybody in a team grid when we had to get in the
Yes.
war room and figure out what we were going to do with cities and people and all the things that we had to
Right.
think about in marketing. And it was so cool to be there in that moment and have practiced our strengths as a department for a long time and be able to say, okay, so and so's got futuristic, so and so's analytical. You know,
Right.
everybody felt like they had a place and they could work much quicker.
Right.
And then that
Right.
transcended
And you could
into,
tap into those
yeah.
strengths.
And then when we went
Yeah.
home to work, we still were able to know that about each other and help each other move
Mm-hmm.
faster, even though it was probably the hardest lesson. But one of the lessons I learned during that time, and then as I launched my business at the end of 2020, was really about how there's no playbook for those times,
Mm-hmm.
but how do we as individuals, as humans, be human during those times and help
Right.
folks, as you said, there that we've lost that not looking as leaders as humans. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things right now a leader can do is show that, they have compassion, they have hope, they have trust, the
Mm-hmm.
things that we know from Gallup people are looking for. So what are things that you find that are some good action items for leaders right now as they're either moving into a new leadership role or even to an more higher role that will help them?
Right. Right. So I always recommend to my clients to go on a listening tour and truly
Mhm.
listen. Don't make assumptions. One of the things I advise my clients is ask questions that you don't know the answer to,
Mm,
and don't make assumptions if you think you know what the answers are, but just really go in with a blank slate. If it's a new project or a new role, to
mhm,
really listen to what people are saying, and then continue that practice of truly listening to people, because it's a great way to make, right, when someone
mhm,
feels heard, they just instantly have that connection and they build trust. And have seen, I did, when quarantine first happened, I took all of my notes of the last 12 years with conversations with clients and went through and was highlighting and trying to see the themes. And what I saw was, what I came away with is that trust is the root of everything.
mm,
And so if leaders can be really deliberate in how they build trust, listening is one of them. Um, really thinking about, if they say to someone, well, I don't trust her, what's going on there? Because what I see is when my clients say to me, we don't trust them, or I don't trust her, that it might be one piece, but they actually have a lot of trust,
mm,
but they're just looking at one aspect. I really trust her because she does what does what she says she's going to do, but I feel she has her own agenda. And so
mm,
if people are able to pull out, what exactly is it that I don't trust in someone, and where have I trusted them, then they're able to really have a healthier, more productive conversation. Because instead of, like, no one that I know at least is going to go in and say, well, I don't trust you, so I'm not going to work with you. Like, that doesn't
right.
happen, right? What usually happens is, I'm not going to work with him anymore.
Mhm,
There's no conversation that's had, because that's hard conversation. So instead, I will coach my clients and teams to say, okay, what's the conversation that needs to happen? And we always start the conversation with, I want a trusting relationship with you, or I
mm,
want to build more trust,
mm.
or we had a trusting relationship, something's shifted, and I want to get back to a trusting relationship.
That's powerful.
So really,
That really is
yes.
powerful. And I think there is a lot of confusion about what trust is
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you're talking about just pulling out what exactly is it. Don't look at the whole body of trust, but what piece of
Exactly.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody's done any
Absolutely.
kind of marital work like I have,
Right, right, right.
it is a lot of work. It's a work. It's
It
giving
is.
trust, but being able to give as well as get. And I think that's a big piece of it too. But
absolutely, absolutely. And it's, like I said in the beginning, my mission is to rid the world of lazy leaders, and instead have our leaders be deliberate, be thoughtful. If if they were going down this path and then they take a right turn, that it be a deliberate choice that they've made. And I always tell people, you have a choice in how you react. You have a choice in the action you take. Right. And if you're being lazy, then you're probably not making a deliberate choice. You're probably being reactive.
Julie, I love your handle there. Get rid of the lazy leader. So what is a not so lazy leader look like? What does that look
Yes.
like?
So a deliberate leader, I
A
like to say.
deliberate, okay.
A deliberate leader is someone who uses strong leadership language. So they are not undermining their language. They're not apologizing if they didn't do anything wrong.
Mm,
They are not weakening their language by using conditional language,
like what
but rather they're
example?
using an example. Oh my gosh, I have lots of examples. And
Yeah.
so one of them is, Dana, I just did a little TED talk. First of all, there's no just and
And
there's
no
no
little.
little in that sentence, right?
Right.
I hear it all the time with authors, professors. I'm just a professor. No,
Mm,
no, no, no. We can eliminate that word just. The only time I say you can use just is when we're talking about in time. I just did this, or this just
mm.
happened, but not using it. I just wrote a little book. Nope, can't do that. Uh, and some other ones are saying, I think or I believe. If you are trying to influence someone, instead of saying, I think this is the right way, or I believe we could be successful, is to say, given my experience, I recommend X, Y, and Z, or I suggest,
Mm.
or I am convinced, given my experience. If someone's going to push back, better that they push back from where you're standing really strong, right? I like to think of those, those, they're like little,
The
I don't even know.
balloon
They look
type
like
people?
those balloon type people like at car
Car dealers.
dealerships, and they're waving,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like, that's really easy to punch them down, right? If someone's going to push
Yes.
back that you're trying to influence, stand firmly. Be one of those massive oak trees in California, right? Like,
Mhm.
stand strong, because someone will push back. And I get a lot of pushback when people say, I can't say I'm convinced. There's no way I can say that. And I said, okay, well, one way to think about this is to manage your tone. So that's another tip
Mm.
that I always offer to people, is to think about the tone that you're using. So if I say to you, I'm convinced, very neutral, I'm convinced that this approach is going to help us reach our goal. That sounds very different than, I'm convinced that this is the only way that we're going to do this. It's very different. And another thing that you can do is then to ask a question. So to say, in that neutral tone, I'm convinced that this will help us reach our goal. What is your sense? Or what do
Mm.
you see could really work? Always trying to get to the positive first, because people so
Mhm.
easily go to what won't work.
Mhm.
I find that that's really helpful in terms of using that strong leadership language.
I think that those are powerful things. So when you're thinking about yourself as a deliberate leader, getting rid of the I'm sorries and I'm not so
Yeah.
sure and I'm just
Expect
doing a talk.
maybe.
And
Yes.
even maybe you talked about tone, but um that emotion of um, just saying something very straightforward versus oh my gosh, just
Right.
that addiction to some kind of drama. um I'm like
Yeah. That's so funny you say that, Dana. Yes. I have a new talk I developed, and it's called Cracked Foundations, from drama to, no, I need to memorize this, but I
That's
talk
okay.
about having, Yeah, drama-free teams. Oh, that's what it is. From conflict to drama-free teams.
Oh, I am all about this,
Because,
sister.
right? Because the laziness factor goes to drama.
Yes. And you know how it shows up? I've seen this not only in teams, but I've seen it with my friends, right? In texting. They're
Mhm.
not reading the text. And
Absolutely.
then and then there's the next text and the next text and and then everybody's all and everybody's like, I'm like, I just I can't listen to this chaos. So
I know, that's when you put it down.
I just say,
I'm not responding.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it is an addiction, right? Because they want to get up and
Mhm.
and I think that's
Yeah,
happening in hybrid as well because they're not there in person and they're trying to
right.
respond and they don't have the tone to listen to.
Absolutely.
And so it's like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm glad you're doing a talk on that. So I can't wait to hear
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, you remind me of, this was years ago, that I was working at a research center at a university, and one of our and we had our clients were corporations, and one of our clients was Levi's. And great guy that we worked with, but his emails were so harsh.
Mm,
And every time one of us received them, we would crumble because it was so mean. And the head of the organization said, just give him a call, because his bark is bigger than his bite.
mm,
And we would, like, I literally would get these really harsh, demeaning emails. I'd pick up the phone and I'd say, hey, let's talk about this. And he'd be so nice, and he'd be thoughtful, and he would ask good questions. And it was and it was a 5-minute conversation. We're not talking about like an hour meeting or anything, but just to know that sometimes, and then what I would find out was that he had young kids at home, and he was just going too quickly, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
to your point about texting and going too quickly, not being thoughtful. And when finally, not me, but when the head of the organization, of my research organization, said to him, hey, this is how my people are receiving your emails, he was mortified. That was
Mm.
not his intention.
So,
So really helping people think about, what's the impact I want to have, and then backing it up, right? So that their intentions and the impact are aligned.
and I think your word lazy is just breaks through all that because it's like, I
Yes,
don't want to take the time to pick up the phone and call or just to make
exactly.
sure I've got the right intentions to match my impact that I want. I just got to move fast.
Right,
And what we're
right.
doing is like I think it goes back to your other point about seeing leaders as human. Is like
Mhm.
we can talk and we can pick up the phone. And especially
Right,
people like you, Julie, that have high communication, I'm going to pick up the phone and call you because you'd rather talk than have me send you lots of things to read. Um,
exactly.
People with high communication get their energy from speaking. And so it's knowing that and being that intentional leader and not being that lazy leader. Oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
This is so good. Okay, Julie, we're getting ready to round out, but what is coming up for you as we get ready to close out to make sure our leaders, our listeners are hearing some great tips other than what you brought about what the deliberate leader is, or anything else that's coming up for you that you want to make sure they know?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, like we've talked about, use strong leadership language. We've given examples there. When you see conflict or even a miscommunication happening, address it. Don't let it
Mhm.
linger, because it just builds and builds and builds and escalates, and it becomes more time consuming. More people are impacted. So deal with conflict when it happens, and listen, like we talked about, be
Mhm.
that world class listener, um, because then you're being that deliberate leader. If you're truly listening, you're being deliberate. But there's no way you can be lazy if you're if you're listening.
And you know what I love that you do is as I hear these your tips, you have this harmony and it's conflict. People with harmony don't like conflict, but yet you're
Mm-mm.
being deliberate and getting in the middle of it and figuring it out.
Right.
And I love the fact too that you have high communication, so you like to speak, but you're teaching yourself to
Hmm.
listen. So you're
Yes.
it's like you have built this for yourself too as you're managing.
Right.
Is that
Right.
right?
Well, I'm not going to go out there and tell people to do something I'm not doing
do it.
myself.
No, but it's
Right.
kind of like we're always
Right.
serving who we once were or what we need.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I love
And
that.
and especially with conflict, I when people say, no, I don't want to deal with conflict. Like I call my mom the ostrich because she'll just stick her head in the sand, and she says like, I'm a diplomat. I'm like, no, you're putting your head in the sand and you're not dealing. You need to have this conversation. But what I have seen for my work for myself and for my clients is that addressing it before it escalates, right? Like we're not trying to get rid of conflict, but we're trying to always de-escalate it. And I find for myself, if something's uncomfortable, something's not working right, instead of letting it go for weeks or months on end, to check in with someone. And my go-to question is, this is what I'm noticing. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So someone that I work with, I noticed that he just wasn't delivering the same caliber of work that he normally had. And so I checked in with him and I said, "Hey, I've noticed that, you're not meeting deadlines, that you're making mistakes. What's going on here for you?" A couple of years ago, I probably would have said nothing and then just stopped working with him. And that's not effective.
No.
Yeah.
And he was
Yeah.
able to
So
tell you what
really
was going on.
exactly. And then it builds more trust between both of us, both ways.
Mhm. And being able to have a
Yeah.
break, give him a break and say, I think people have like a story in their head about what other people are going through, but
Absolutely.
giving them that open
Absolutely.
window to say, hey, are we good? What's going on? I love that. I think that's really good.
Yes.
So, Julie,
Yes.
how can folks get a hold of you or find you if they want you to
Sure.
come speak or come and work with their executives? What's the best way?
Yes. So my website is julieholunga.com, HOLUNGA. I'm on LinkedIn, Julie Holunga, as well. And those are the two best places to see, sort of tips and articles and blogs posts and listen to podcasts I've been on and see my TED Talk. All that kind of stuff is all there on my site.
That's great. And best to you, your kids, the college, all that you have
Thank you.
ahead of you with that. Oh, I mean, my goodness, they're going to be great. They're going to be great.
Thank
So
you.
thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Dana.
for being here today and for leaving us such great tips. And no more lazy leaders out there, right? We're going to be deliberate leaders.
No more.
So
Yes.
thank you
Thank
for
you,
the great
Dana.
work you're doing. You bet. Thank you.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to Dominate Your Day wherever you listen.